and pleasure today is to welcome you to our panel discussion on the post-2020 Multiannual Financial Framework. As you know, once in 7 years, there comes a time when the EU institutions and member states must negotiate new priorities and rules of the game with respect to the financing of our common future. Every time in these 7 years, the EU faces different challenges and opportunities due to the rapidly changing political economic landscape at home in Europe and also abroad in the wider world. The upcoming negotiations will not differ in this, and yet they will be, of course, specific and distinct of our historical moment. The outlook for these negotiations seems once again challenging, with the UK leaving and many unresolved issues piling up in front of us, including the evergreens such as the need to reform and complete the economic and monetary union, and also new issues like the ongoing digital transformation and security, among others. However, we might not forget that our time now belongs among the more fortunate ones. The European project has literally survived many of its recent life-threatening crises, and although many pessimists would claim that the new crises are still looming, the EU has got a little bit of time, a narrow window of opportunity to recover and think about the investment into a more sustainable future. This is a luxury which we didn't have some 7 years ago or even 4 years ago, in the midst of many economic and political crises traveling around Europe. Much of the common future will, of course, depend on the shape of the next EU budget, which will define what can and cannot be done with the European project, and whether the European Union will be capable to demonstrate its real added value. This is why I'm happy that Petr Zahradník, whose lifelong passion is the inquiry into EU budgeting, has accepted our offer to write this year's Prague European Summit study on this very important topic, a study which you can download from the summit's official webpage. Petr is currently a member of the European Economic and Social Committee. He graduated from the University of Economics in Prague, Catholic University of Leuven, and also Columbia University, in fields ranging from economic theory to European studies. He has also successfully pursued a career as an analyst, consultant, and academician in many prestigious public and private institutions in Czechia and abroad. And last but not least, he's also publishing op-eds in respected Czech newspapers, which also makes him in Prague and Czechia a well-quoted and respected expert on the issues of European integration. Thus, I'm really happy that you invested your valuable time to write the study, and you will be now discussing it with me in a 30-minute dialogue, and later in a panel chaired by Mehren Khan, and including also more respected speakers. So, Petr, the EU is now about to negotiate its already 7th Multiannual Financial Framework. Your study starts with a thorough historical reflection on the EU budgeting. Can the history of this institutional evolution actually inform us about whether we can still afford to follow the business as usual or need to break the path dependency in a favor of a new innovative direction in EU budgeting?
Thank you very much, Daniel, for the question. Thank you very much for being invited to this event. And I think that regarding your first question, the European integration history simply shown us that the economic, social, environmental, perhaps structural paradigm has radically changed. Radically changed not only since the start of the practice of multi-annual financial frameworks in 1988, but even well before this, let's say, common EU or EC financing was introduced. The changes are connected with, I would say, very radical changeovers in the rule of key industries on the EU economy. During 60s, the industrial contribution to GDP was around 50%. Currently, it's less than 20%. On the other hand, agriculture, which is a very substantial part of the common EU financing in the 60s amounted or contributed to the EC GDP with something like 15%. Currently it's 1.5%. So it's one reason why also the common EU financing simply had to react somehow. But it's not only about the structure changes inside the European Union. It's also about the position of Europe within the global competition, within the world ranking. I have selected for this purpose a visibly shorter timeline showing that in 2004 EU28 contributed to the world GDP with something like 31%. In 2014, the last figures I have observed for this purpose, it's by some 8 percentage points less. That's other, I would say, reason why the European budget or the common financing is to somehow react. And of course, there are some new points in the whole period of EU integration, like, for example, in the 60s, the need to provide restructuring after the wars. Agricultural policy at that time, very important priority for the EU. Then all the period of 80s, preparation for the single market creation, then unprecedented enlargements. Simply, during this period of time, we have registered really many substantial reasons, and the European financing had to adjust them. I would perhaps add that the changes are not only quantitative, and for example, for the comparison of two programming periods, 2007-13 and 14-20, the right column illustrates that some important percentage changes really occurred, but now it's rather about qualitative changes, about a new view on the sense of EU financing. So back to your question, I think that the proposed multi-annual financial framework is no longer a business as usual. It's rather an effort to construct the multi-annual financial framework in a, let's say, slightly innovative direction, and of course we will see how this proposal will be accepted by the member states and the parliament in the next future.
And given the dynamics, the increasing dynamics, global and European, you introduce, doesn't seem that the multi-annual financial frameworks represent a shooting on a very rapidly moving target? And is it even possible to adjust this multi-annual budgeting so that the EU can, efficiently address our future challenges with respect to the European economic and monetary integration in particular, or also our global competitiveness in general?
I think that any instrument of economic policy is a kind of moving target. It's trying to reflect the economic reality. It's very difficult to imagine any economic policy instrument that is, I would say, 100% tailored for the reality, not talking about the future expectations. And I think it's also the case of the European Union budget. The reason why we are talking about such a substantial change is also the fact that despite some changes I tried to illustrate before, its structure remained, I wouldn't say rigid, but very fixed for the whole period of time. And not only new topics connected with the geopolitical situation, but also unprecedented technological changes or technological innovations, innovation in the financial sector itself, new models or new concepts for public financing, the acceptation of the fact that subsidy is no longer the only instrument for public finances and for the accommodation of some public interests and public service. And of course, new elements and new phases of the European Union development itself. There is a big, I would say, lesson coming from the last crisis, but which is connected with the effort to create an environment of financial and economic stability, strengthen governance, all, I would say, mechanism of the European semester that's trying to create really prudent but of course well-performing environment of the European Union economy. Efforts like banking union, capital market union, or together financial union, which is also a complementary part to the EU financing. So many, I would say, new elements have occurred in the last 10 years, and I think that this moving target or the solution for the moving target for the future are the two key symbols or two key words that, at least in my opinion, reflect the current proposal we are talking about, and it's the flexibility and is the European added value. Flexibility in many senses, both on revenue and expenditure sides, more effort for own resources on the expenditure side, more space for changes among the main headings of the budget, and also higher implementation of financial instruments into the system. And the European added value as probably the most important principle that is connected with the proposal, but of course the key problem of it is its common understanding, because nowhere is written its, I would say, explicit definition.
So indeed, your study really highlights the concept of European added value as a sort of right viewpoint from which to flexibly calibrate the EU's budget priorities now and in future. But also the European added value has been also criticized as a sort of vague concept which rather confuses the aims of EU policy making than rather making them clearer. Is there any remedy to that problem, to that vagueness?
I'm not quite sure if there is a remedy, but I think it's a big challenge for all, I would say, interested players to contribute to this discussion. The proposal at least offers some kind of explanation of this concept, saying that the EU added value is something where the common EU financing is more effective and more efficient in comparison from being financed from the national or some other sources. I would perhaps add that in my understanding, EU added value is also something where the benefits or the results are not only local or regionally based, but the effects are quite visible in the cross-border context, not only in the macro EU context, but also, for example, on the cross-border regional levels. We have in the European Union plenty of regions that create some natural homogeneous organisms, but they are divided by national borders, and elimination of some peripheries on the national borders, in my opinion, especially where it does have sense, is one of the very, I would say, practical examples for the application of the EU added value. So we will perhaps talk about it during the next debate, but I think that EU added value could be a good instrument to overcome the current division of the players on net payers and net recipients. I personally understand as a part of this, I would say, EU added value universe, also the implementation or a robust implementation of financial instruments where a market test could serve as a line for effective allocation of sources, and even inviting some other source of capital for the EU financing, like private sources or national public sources. So the EU added value, I admit, is a very, I would say, comprehensive category, and the mission for the practical functioning of the Multiannual Financial Framework is to make a consensus about a commonly understood definition of it.
So are you in favor of moving beyond the binary thinking on net recipients and net payers? And who shall then define what is the European added value? Because sometimes it looks like the member states, who are the paymasters, try to define what should be the added value for them rather than for the net recipients, because it's their money, it's not the recipient's money. And then you have the net recipients saying, like, it's ours money, we needed money because that's our sort of European consensus that we get the money in an envelope.
Definitely.
So is the European added value something that helps us to move beyond that binary thinking? And who shall then decide the content? Is it the Commission, the net payers, the net receivers?
I would very much I think that this concept or this construction we had described is especially a kind of mental problem, because the level of redistribution was really connected with the division on net payers and net recipients. I think that the practical implementation of the EU added value could contribute to solve this problem currently. Something like 76-77% of the European Union budget are managed or allocated within the so-called shared management, with the, I would say, common effort of national states and the European Commission. Only roughly 1/4 of the European Union budget is directly managed from the level of the European Commission, and we are observing the trend that the ratio of shared managed programs is slightly declining, and on the other hand the portion for the centrally managed programs is increasing. It could be one of the ways. The second is one of the explanation of the flexibility, which is one of the requirements, for example, from the countries, from the regions. We are now not only the V4 countries, but I would say generally the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, where some kind of flexibility about the decision making, about the allocation of money is requested. It will be probably the big problem for the final negotiation. I am personally convinced that the guaranteed national envelope is not a guarantee for more effective allocation of the money, and I would be rather in favor of continuing trend which strengthens step by step the position of centrally managed programs. But it's one of the, I would say, points that could only contribute to the solution of the EU added value issue.
So the EU added value and flexibility are the key approaches to approach the new budget.
I read this.
And the framework. And regarding that need, I think this is a question that will probably spill over into the panel, is regarding the need, how would you evaluate the recent European Commission's proposal? Does it offer a really promising and ambitious vehicle of investment for a sustainable future in and of Europe? In, I mean, like for the citizens and businesses, and of as a project?
I think that it's a in the history of common EU financing, it's the biggest challenge to find a symbiosis between the old and the new. I think that it is the first moment in this history when reaching this symbiosis is, in my opinion, very complicated, but on the other hand, feasible. In my opinion, the new proposal is a proposal for an instrument from guaranteed national envelopes to strengthened pan-European projects, from formal to performance and result-based criteria, from subsidies as absolutely dominant method of redistribution to more innovative financial instruments, from very traditional topics to the new ones, and from a kind of rigidity to strengthen flexibility, and all this under simplified rules and strengthened responsibility of the key actors. And I think that altogether contributing rather to supply side measures or support of supply side measures than only pushing demand up. So that's my very, I would say, fragmented and concentrated view on this proposal.
So with that question, I think our time is running out, and I would like to invite the other speakers and Mehran to the floor. And I would like to remind you once again that you can download Mr. Zahradník's study directly from the webpage of the Prague European Summit. I'll leave the floor. Yeah.
Okay. Well, when I go? I don't know. Okay. The mic is on.
Oh, why
okay.
they?
Oh, I cannot speak then. But this is. Okay. You're going to be in the.
Hello, everyone. Thank you to Daniel for introducing us and for Petr for doing his presentation. I'm Martina Khan. I'm one of the Brussels correspondents for the Financial Times, and I've been based in Brussels for the last 9 or so months, and the MFF is going to be something that my colleagues and myself are going to be preoccupied with for at least, I think, the next 12 months, probably a little bit more. I'm very glad that we have a great panel today with us. If just on the way we're going to do proceedings, I think we'll open up, and I will use my prerogative to ask a couple of questions to the panelists, but I would encourage everyone to think of their own questions. We should have a mic going around at the end. I think we'll have about 20 minutes. We're also using Slido. I don't know if anyone is familiar. If you're too shy and you don't want to use the mic, you can actually type in your question. And I think there might be a poll up there as well. And the questions will be coming up on the screen, and I'll be able to pick them as and when we do the presentation. But first of all, let me start with our panel. So sitting next to me, we have Jorge Nunes Ferrer, who's a senior research fellow at CEPS, the Centre for European Policy Studies, based in Brussels. And then we also, on the far end, we have Petr Mutz, who's head of the communication unit for DG Budget. So he can give us some of the Commission's thinking behind the proposals we've seen over the last month or so. And then finally, we have Martina Kobilicová, who is the Director General for International Cooperation at the Ministry of Finance for the Slovak Republic. And we've also still got Petr here, so any immediate questions about the paper, we'll be able to put them to him. Let me start with Martina. As a representative of one of the 27 governments that's going to be involved in talking and thrashing out the MFF, what is your government's position? I know that Slovakia has said that it's willing to pay more into the new budget, but it's also shown some concern about parts of the cuts, particularly in cohesion policy. So with this debate sort of getting going now, and with the Commission having put out all of its papers, where do you stand as a government?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you once again for the invitation to be here. Replying straight to a question, I think it's a big progress in our short history in Slovakia that really political stance is such that made a clear statement that Slovakia is ready to contribute more. So first of all, we welcome really much the Commission's proposal in terms of volume. We think it should be higher, and it should respond to current needs, because when, as it was mentioned by my predecessor, I mean, we, although a small country in the heart of Europe, we are well aware of such important changes taking place, you know, when compared to a previous MFF, when nobody was aware that the Brexit would be on the place. Nobody would think that the migration crisis would be, you know, such pronounced, and as it is these days, that the terrorism would rise up again in the same extent, and then the US and EU relations sort of would make Europe aware of the fact that, hey guys, you should be careful of your defense, and be able to progress in this field as well. And of course, the legacy of the economic crisis after 2008, which put really a hard time to all of Europe, but especially on the southern Europe. And not counting the fact, as it was mentioned in the initial presentation, that crowding in the private sector became a really crucial issue when designing the new EU budget, looking for new ways. So our government is like perfectly in line with and realizing that these are the challenges and that the budget and its structure should respond as much as possible. I mean, we can talk about it to what extent, what is realistic, what is maybe less realistic, because I mean, we have the ideal that we would like to reach, and then we have the political reality, and it's always a big fight, I would say, especially when it comes to finances.
Let me go to Petr at the end. Your job is to manage the way that people like me, the journalists, and the wider world sort of interpret what the Commission is doing. How would you evaluate how it's gone so far? So the way that we've it's been managed is that we had a sort of a big sort of presentation about the structure, and over the last couple of weeks we've been having smaller series of presentations from various commissioners about how individual elements of the MFF will work. One of the more eye-catching ones from the journalist perspective was the changes to cohesion policy, and in particular a sort of a geographical shift as it was interpreted to some smaller Eastern European countries who've been doing relatively economically well, and then changing some of the, I think Berlin criteria is the kind of jargon, but the sort of criteria on which countries can access it to mean that the likes of Spain, Italy, Greece would be eligible for more. Do you think the way that that narrative was spun was something that the Commission welcomed? Is it true? It seems to have made some member state governments quite upset. From a communications point of view, how do you manage stuff like that?
Well, thanks for the invitation. If I were to answer to all your questions, I would probably need 1 hour and a half just to pointing out one by one several aspects that you've mentioned. I just want to remind you that this is the first budget we are preparing for EU 27. And we had to face the whole of 84 billion euro. If we have here the European Summit, and if I'm not mistaken, the Tower Bridge here in the middle of this logo. So when we are talking now about the MFF, we are talking without the Tower Bridge. So we are talking about the EU at 27, and we had to sort of square the circle, because if we were to react to all the requirements, we would not be at 1.11% of GNI, but maybe at 2% of GNI, and it would still be, let's say, probably too little for all the expectations. The Commission had to react to what is being expected for the traditional policies, and here we come with modernization, and it was mentioned by Petr in his exposé, and earlier in the previous section. There was a major crisis. We had to react, and we had to take into account what the European citizens wanted us to react to. That means border protection, address migration, defense was mentioned as well. So that's always a very difficult thing to come up with a proposal that would please everybody. And I can say that, just reacting to the Slovak reaction, I think the reaction to our proposal was overly positive and well balanced. Definitely, you cannot please everybody with that proposal. So now the Commission made what we thought was necessary. We didn't do it just on our own. I think that Commissioner Oettinger just closed his tour de capitale in Bratislava this week, and he really went to every member state and listened to the people. We did public consultations where 11,000 people participated. So that was not just taken out of the blue. And I think that we had to react also to those who contribute to the EU budget, as well as to those who are taking, let's say, the benefit from EU budget. And much was said here in the inaugural speech about the net balances effect. And I think that just getting back to the history, I mean, 1988, do you know why the financial framework started in 1988? What was before? There was a prime minister that says, I want my money back. And in Fontainebleau 1984, she got her money back. She got her 1 billion ECU at that time of the so-called British rebate. And since that, definitely, DG Budget had to calculate the so-called net positions because they were key for calculating the British rebate. So we're publishing the net positions every year, but we don't like it because it's a statistical exercise. It is just a pure statistics, and even the formula, I always joke that it's known by 2 or 3 people in the whole DG, because it has to be, let's say, something is deducted, like administration, then the resources, traditional owned resources, are not on the real calculation, but a kind of extrapolation of GNI. Well, I think there's a 4-pager about how it is being done. So I think here, again, the proposal, and Petr mentioned it several times, is about EU added value. And the EU added value, I don't think we should look for definitions. If you look at our proposals, there is a section on EU added value in each of the proposals. And that, I think, quite concrete. Just to say that EU added value is not a concept that is new. In every annual proposal for a budget, each Directorate General has to state the EU added value of the proposal and of the program. So I'm afraid I did not answer your questions, but I think that for the kickoff of the discussion, I wanted to make these things clear.
George, as someone who's looking from outside, we've heard the Commission saying that they think it's balanced. A lot of member states said it wasn't balanced, so we had a revolt amongst the richer countries who were upset about things like losing their rebate, and then we have some concerns from poorer member states. I think Poland said it was a divisive budget, which was a power grab on behalf of the Commission. If you're looking from outside, what's your verdict on what we've seen over the last 4 weeks or so from the Commission side?
Oof, I don't know, I am changing my mind every 2 days, so maybe after tomorrow I will have another opinion. It is, I have to say, I was not overly impressed. It's a proposal that goes, it is well done. It is well done. No? It's very well presented, very well structured. I find that to some extent something has to change because it just somehow falls at a certain point, and then I felt a bit like it's like being pushed full speed. Because there is a parliament election and all of this, and I have this feeling that that may work or may a bit backfire. It depends. I think that the idea of some concepts are right, but it is still a bit. There was something a bit old-fashioned in it. One of this is that first of all is that in fact we say net balances are not important. The figures are all there, and the problem with that document is that the first thing you know is the net balance. You immediately find out because you can calculate, there is all the tables are the same, and I think the budget has changed, I have to say, a lot, because it does a lot of other things that I think should have been put more into it. Like, what is the relationship of the budget with the European Investment Bank? What is the relationship of the budget with the national budget, the coordination? What is the overall space? And I think that the narrative that, because that was missing a little bit, even if you were proposing the same things, I think it has pushed people into fighting their corners on the net balances, like the Polish and so on. So I think it's normal that there is a shift of funding that was somehow to be expected. I mean, if you look at after the crisis, which countries have gone down. Now, if you look at it from a Polish point of view, you'd say, oh, because, I mean, they have mismanaged it. No? We are much better. Or from here, I said, we are doing it well. These guys didn't do it well for 30 years. Now they go down, it's their fault. But in a certain way, you do have the employment. The most serious problems of unemployment are now accumulating in southern countries. There is an issue about, if you look at cohesion, there is an issue about some kind of long-term, maybe structural problems down there, while this country and also Poland, you're all in an area that seems, from all indicators, to be going up, even if the funding goes down. You are in the center of, let's say, the economic dynamics. You are inside the new economic banana. Let's say this shift, there was this banana in the north, now it's going up to here. You are inside dynamics that are there. And I think that the changes that are happening in the south are really concerning in the sense that it does also have political connotations, have a lot of other connotations. So it's normal that there is a shift, and I understand it. I think only from the point of view of the document, the presentation, I find that some of the things were a bit too pushed. I don't understand very well the total allocation, the structural reforms paper. I don't understand some of the parts. And then I was one of the authors of the report that for the Monti group, the background report, not his, but he took a lot of the things, which is nice. And I find that also the resources, everything is like, here it is, there were 12, there are 3, and we are bringing you 3, and you negotiate the 3. And I said, why not a little bit more space? A little bit more, a few other options. Why plastic only and not plastic and CO2? Why not a little bit of something more? That's my overall. So I think it's okay, but it left me a bit, I feel that the real changes like the intervention of national promotional banks, all of these are huge investments. This is combined, this has to be combined. We need to have better combined strategies. The other thing in regions, what I would say for the future, I understand that you cannot propose that, but I think that regions, the pre-allocation at regional level, if you do pre-allocation, should be at macro regions with a bit more competition between regions. Something where you are taking the economic regions have very little to do with the administrative regions. And we do not have enough cross-border, trans-border things. And I think that the regions should be forced a little bit to work together when they have to do a strategy. And you can only do this if you don't pre-allocate by country and by region. You need to pre-allocate in a different way. But this is for the next MFF. This was a bit too much asking, but it's just, wishes. I'm always allowed to dream, am I not? Anyway.
Petr, do you want to come back on any of the confusion or to help out George on some of the points that he's left wanting on?
No, I think that Jorge is right, that and he's fully entitled to have wishes, and I'm sure that we can have wishes. We have a game in one of our public events where we have 12 different areas, and we give people 3 pieces of banknotes, fake banknotes, and they are to decide to which of the 12 areas they put the budget. And that's our situation. So definitely we would like to please anybody in the Commission, but the Commissioner for the Budget has to play the so-called role of a finance minister. He has to take into account what is in there. And I think that taking into account the own resources destiny in the previous proposals, because in 2011 the Commission proposed new own resources as well, and the Member States practically did not react that much to that fact, and only thanks to the role of the European Parliament, this issue has been then taken out and the Monti group was created. And I think that in our reflection paper we have enumerated a couple of different proposals for resources to EU budget. But then, as I said, our commissioner and the president, they were in contact with the member states, and we had to put on the table what is, in our opinion, realistic. And I think the tax on carbon, the CCCTB, the plastic tax, ETIAS as other resource, which is the visa system for the European Commission, or the seigniorage, what is for the EU countries, is there. And I think the major event that certainly goes unnoticed to many who are not that familiar with EU budget is we have proposed the abolition of rebates. So Commissioner Oettinger says when the mother of the rebates, meaning the one the Margaret Thatcher has created, goes, then all the rebates go. And we have proposed gradual reduction of the rebates so that the income of the budget is transparent. Yeah. But you have to take into account that when about the levels of spending, we have to have a consensus at the level of member states, and there is yes or no from the European Parliament, on the own resources, on the income, you have all the member states' governments voting in their parliaments about the own resources. That means, I usually say it when somebody says, oh, you are taking our money. No, it was the Czech parliament down there, it was the British parliament, the Slovak parliament that has approved the own resources to the EU budget for 7 years to come. And we as a Commission wanted to propose something that at least might have some realistic chance to be approved by all the now 27 parliaments. But before that, the member states have to approve it by consensus, definitely.
Martina, can I ask you then, as a representative of a member state, from your perspective, and maybe if you read the room around your colleagues, what of the own resources proposals, from the plastics contribution to the changing of the customs duties to ETIAS, which one of them is a goer in your opinion, and which ones do you think are going to be completely untouched?
Well, first of all, I think it's really important that the Commission put on the table some of the new resources, because I know that the topic and the decision on which should be these resources is so much difficult, and as you just said, politically very sensitive. We welcome very much that introducing the plastic tax or the ETS tax. I mean, we see it, that there is a new tendency on motivations. Okay, so setting the motivations right for the countries, and to realizing that we need new sources where to finance the needs that are becoming larger. From our perspective, I would say old resources, such as based on the GNI or customs, are the ones that are still valid, and I'm sure, they will be valid. We know there is in the proposal on the VAT there are some. There is new proposal on changes or simplification. We are not sure whether these new simplifications are fair. So when we look at the how it would hit, the other countries in the EU, we question whether Slovakia and specifically this region comes out of it as the one that could be treated unfair. But on the other side, I understand it's very difficult to find such resources that would be fair to everybody. So I think there will be a tough negotiations on resources.
Petr, one of the things that we haven't mentioned so far is conditionality, and this is a sort of another one of these buzzwords that surrounds this MFF, and in particular strengthening what the Commission would say would be the criteria for how a member state can access and keep accessing funds. So on the one hand, we will have a new rule of law criteria. There's also a drive to make the semester a greater part of how countries can access their structural funds. Can you sort of try and explain some of the logic behind this, and maybe what you think of it, and whether, so also you can see on here there's a poll which I think would probably link to this, but how is Central Eastern Europeans' view of the EU going to be changed by what will happen in the MFF? And conditionality, I think, is going to be a big part of whether these countries feel that they might be being targeted explicitly, politically, for some of their developments.
Thank you very much. Explicitly defined conditionalities was the new element for the currently functioning period 2014-2020. I personally understand the conditionalities as a, let's say, elimination of a kind of free riding in the utilization of the common European sources, and I've been always a supporter of this instrument. As an economist, I also understand the set of macroeconomic conditionalities, and I would be in favor in continuation in this practice also in the future. Conditionalities and together with thematic concentration, in my opinion, contribute very substantially to some focus, some concrete focus of the allocation of sources. I'm not in favor of the practice where countries that, let's say, have some own homeworks for decades and even do not allocate for this purpose their own national funds, use for this environment the common European funds. Now it's true that the connection with the European semester, for example, for the support reform program, for these types of, let's say, performance on one hand and some macroeconomic discipline indicators strengthens this way, and of course it's not possible on the other hand to use conditionalities only as a punishment focused on individual or several member states. In that case, I think that the practice of conditionalities is misused, but generally the sense I personally consider as very rational, and I would be very much in favor of, let's say, respecting some good practice from the current period adapted for the next one.
Jorge, can I get your opinion on whether you think conditionality could prove to be a divisive element which delays the agreement of this MFF, or are there other things that the member states are going to be fighting about more?
Well, I mean, the budget has an enormous amount of conditionalities. A lot of them are not the problem. There are 2 or 3 that will be an issue. The issue is, of course, there are these macro conditionalities. There will be discussion about this. And the second one, maybe there is the issue about, of course, the rule of law. But when you read the rule of law one, it's very much about defending the financial interest of the EU. So in fact, if you read it from a very legal point of view, I think it's more about when the finance is in trouble. So it's not also, I think, legally, it's very difficult to link the EU funding really with some kind of big political issues. So it would be very, very exceptional. So the rule of law there is a lot more about if the system actually can defend. I would say that conditionality is should be worrying a lot more the south of Italy or some other countries rather than even Poland, because it is very clear that one of the main targets is when you cannot trust the system of defending the funding. This means if you think that the system of, even the legal system, will not protect the financial interest of the EU, this is what the most clear picture. All the rest is in interpretations, but if you just read it like this. So that will be discussion, but maybe it will be less strong and coming from parts that are not as obvious, or countries that are not the ones we think of. On conditionalities, macro, yes, there will be issues, and the question is how to do that. And then I have always this question, when a region is very good at doing its things, what is going to come into the macro? Is it only like the cohesion fund? Or is it also the other funds? Because some regions perform very well. Some regions in a country may be performing very well, very pro-European, very whatever, and you have others that are bad boys. If you punish the country, or if you cut the funds of a country because of a misbehavior at central government with their structural reforms, when a region is actually doing very well, many countries are federal or semi-federal or things, so it's a bit problematic there. I think that something has to be clarified. This is my point. These are the 2 areas. The other conditionalities, strategic obligations, so that actually now many of them are being called enablers, so you make a difference. I saw the change in the text, and that's it. Now, one last point. You forgot one of the most revolutionary parts in the text on resources. The most revolutionary is the sentence that says that when there is a real own resource, you will not include it in the ceiling of the budget. That is an enormous revolutionary. This is the most, I mean, maybe you don't say it because nobody thinks it's going to go through, but I'm just telling you, that's a very interesting sentence. I've never seen it before. I'm just have to say that that was quite a daring move by Oettinger.
I'd like to move the conversation onto the Eurozone because increasingly some of the novel elements in this budget are going to be tied to the Eurozone countries, and this is something that's come from most obviously from Macron. And people who were sort of aware yesterday of what was happening in Meseberg will know that the Franco-German paper has said quite explicitly that there's open to the idea of having a Eurozone budget which could look at unemployment insurance. And I see one of the questions is on the Slido is referencing unemployment, but more generally the labour markets. The Commission's proposal sort of also hinted at the idea of a Eurozone budget, but it kept it to investment, and it looked more at a lending facility, which was seen at that point to be what was politically palatable. But it seems like in the last 24 hours, we are talking about something a bit more ambitious, and I think the member state governments have been told that they will have till the end of the year to come up with something. Martina, can I get your reaction to what you read yesterday coming out of the Franco-German proposal, and generally, does Slovakia think there is even a macroeconomic need to have a Eurozone budget to do things like stabilization?
Well, I think it's a big step forward that Eurozone budget is introduced now in the current proposal. And you might recall, or you might not recall, but during our presidency, EU presidency in 2016, the building a fiscal capacity for the Eurozone was one of the topics that we put on the table when holding informal ECOFIN in Bratislava. We wanted finance ministers to discuss it. Of course, I mean, our idea would be, I would say, would have larger ambitions that we have on the table now. So we were saying that the fiscal capacity for Eurozone should be basically the investment capacity and the unemployment insurance scheme. What we have in the proposal now goes into the direction of the investment capacity. We can question whether the 30 billion is enough. But certainly, as I said, we are very eager to see this proposal. Because we think, I mean, the bottom line of it is that we really truly believe that Eurozone should have mechanisms, that make it stronger and more resilient.
This is a question to anyone who wants to jump in, but bringing in a very explicit Eurozone element which will do things for Eurozone countries, does it threaten to open up another fight, and that's with the non-Euro countries, who I guess will legitimately feel they have a right to not lose out? Petr, maybe you might want to come in?
Well, I was just reading what my president said today on the Franco-German paper, and it is that it's an important contribution to the European progress in many places. So I think that's what I would say in the name of the European Commission concerning these proposals.
When the initial Commission proposal on the investment fund was done,
on the investment plan is something different because that concerns all member states. So our Invest EU, and I think this is something which should be also added maybe to the EU budget, because the Juncker plan's success is a generation of almost around 300 billion investment, private investment in a couple of years, and we propose that thanks to 15 billion from EU budget, you can generate 650 billion in investment over the 7-year period. So if you add 650 to the nearly 1,200,000,000,000, so it's if you compare it, it's half of the EU budget proposed for 7 years that you can generate thanks to the EU budget in investment. So I think it's a major challenge, and it's not only open for the European Investment Bank group, but it's also open for the national support banks. And we put all the financial instruments, try to streamline it, and I think make it much clearer. And especially speaking in this country, it's something that has been discussed very little here. There is a big chance, and especially for a country that is having a good economic record, it's just a time to shift from cohesion only to other sources of investment. And if you had in the past, I think in Petr's study, he says that 40% of public investment is thanks to EU budget. Then in some countries in Central Europe, in the past, you had 80% of annual public investment thanks to cohesion. But we cannot have just one source of investment, of public investment coming from the cohesion money. There is, and the Commission has tested it, it functions, it works, and there is a money that is not subsidies, that's a loan, but a loan guaranteed, that you can invite public capital and you can generate a lot of money. And I think, especially in the well-performing economies in Central and Eastern Europe, this is a chance that we should take.
Petr, in your paper, you mentioned that the rigidities of the MFF, or having a long-term 7-year program, mean that being kind of agile and quick on your feet to respond to a recession or an asymmetric shock or a financial crisis means the MFF is not a natural home to do something like counter-cyclical policy. So in that sense, is there any point having a shiny new Eurozone budget stuck in the rules of the old-school MFF?
I'm rather realistic, and I, of course, admit that it's not possible to be absolutely flexible. I think that especially during the period 2007-2013, the series of shocks, economic and then consequently geopolitics, were, I would say, unprecedentedly high, and I personally think that from the point of view risk management or the preparation for the future battles, surely the general proposal is visibly well equipped than the last ones. On the other hand, of course, we are still in the middle of 2018, and it's very difficult to predict what will be in the second half of next decade, not only in the horizon of some additional risks, external as well as internal, but also on the field of some technology progress. The area of digital market or digital society in relative terms is, in my opinion, quite rationally almost 10 times higher than in the previous programming period, but I am not a futurologist to predict what will be really important and substantial in 2026, but my general opinion is that really the equipment of the proposal is much better constructed to eliminate some risks and less vulnerable than the previous concepts.
Do you want to come in?
No. Yes, I mean, the idea of, first of all, there is one thing that worries me a little bit in the discussion on the budget. Not everything has to be done by the EU budget. And this is one of the problems that I have, is that we will try to do stabilization in the Euro budget. I mean, the Eurozone is the Eurozone, and we have the ESM, and we can have even the idea, there is the idea of creating European Monetary Fund and to create something else. I don't like the name very much, you know, the IMF is not such a good, you know, the name. I would change it, but okay, a fund in Europe that would handle these things rather than to find a way to squeeze it, especially when you have a hard ceiling in the budget, to somehow squeeze somewhere in the margin some kind of activity or whatever. Or I would have preferred to say the EU budget is an investment budget. And then we can discuss the CAP if you want, but because that's another story. But let's say that EU budget is an investment budget, and then you have stabilization. And stabilization at a certain level is not, according to me, something that Euro budget should be doing, because the amount of money and when you need it is not the same. It's not something you can program. And that's why I would have liked that we try to avoid to try to tackle this in the budget, because in the end what happens is that when something happens, then the budget will be too small, then you will have to call from something outside, and it just causes delays and trouble. This is the only reason why I'm not so, yeah, it's good that one tries to do something, but why the budget? I mean, I know everybody wants it in the budget, but it's not the rightful place. Now, about the tension between the non-Eurozone and the Eurozone, this can be sorted, because first of all, the UK, well, if it doesn't leave, it will not be sorted so easily, but the UK is leaving, which means that these are not many. Most countries are candidates or are on the process to join, and economically they are not so big that if they have to be assisted, you could not just integrate it into the system of support, because they are outside, but there are ways. We had the balance of payment system in the past, in the previous MFF. This was supposed for non-Eurozone. There is no problem to have these ones also somehow catered with the system, so you sort this problem out. It should not be, I think it's true, we should not exclude the ones that are outside. And you can sort it, but maybe the main tool is not the EU budget in itself. That's my main message, really.
Thank you. I think on the EMF, it will definitely not be called the EMF, because there's only one institute in the EU which is allowed to have the word monetary in its title, and that's the ECB.
And it doesn't use it.
And they don't use it, but they've got very upset about it. So in the course of my reporting, one of the weird things I learned was that it's definitely not going to be called a European Monetary Fund.
It's not the biggest problem.
It's not the biggest problem. No.
Yeah, if I can just add what you just said, of course, I mean, also for us, ideal case would be not to see, you know, within the EU budget, you know, the line for the Eurozone. I completely agree with you. But I mean, putting in realistic terms, probably this is the only, you know, starting point that we could put clearly. Okay, so I mean, here we really comes to reality, because the function and transformation of ESM has just started. And hopefully it will go to the direction it seems like it will go, also based on yesterday's release of the Franco-German agreement. But then we would it could again delay us, you know, in this process, you know, to start having some concrete, real tool for the stabilization.
I'm going to open it up to questions very soon, but one other topic that I want to broach, because I haven't seen it come up in the questions, is this rebate issue, or I think in the Commission's official jargon it's correction mechanism. And I'm worried that there's not a kind of rich country or net payer representative here, so I will try and play the role of what they would argue. So a country like the Dutch would say that they are being hit by Brexit economically as a country which is very tied to the UK's economic fortunes. They're also a net payer, and they're having to pay more, and they feel they're losing out, and then they're also going to lose their rebate. So it's kind of a triple whammy for a country like Holland. Do you think actually that a correction mechanism will survive in some form? It might not be the rebate, because the rebate will disappear, and then the rebate on the British rebate will also disappear. But will the Commission have to put something to soften the blow for the likes of the Dutch, the Austrians, the Germans, etc.? Okay, I'll start with you.
Oh, me. It is always possible to reach some kind of solution. At the end, the compromise, the famous text that says that countries should not be paying disproportionately, whatever is the interpretation, because it's so open, you can decide whatever. The Fontainebleau text is very vague. So it is possible that at the end there could be decision on some way. it will not be a rebate. It should not be a mechanism like the British one that at the end nobody understands. It is so complicated. And it should be lump sums, as they say, and this would be a kind of thing at the last minute if it's absolutely necessary, and this is real politics. I mean, it could happen. Their cases are particular. You could actually check, you know, compare to their relative wealth, is it really a very big ball or no, and try to actually find also a rationale, something that really makes it a rational, time-limited, specific case, if necessary. The problem of the UK rebate is it was not limited, time-limited, and it had this little, very silly point that it was created because the UK was poor. Then it remained, and when the UK became practically the richest country in the EU, they were having a bigger rebate because they were richer. So the richer you are, the bigger your rebate. This is a total nonsense. So if there is something with the Netherlands, it is possible. It is possible because they do have a some kind of triple whammy. But let's see, it will come, you know, it's, let's be open to it, but let's make sure it's not called rebate, maybe. Could be called something else, temporary concession. I mean, we'll call it rebate, but it could be
I'm allowed
lump
to dream.
sum.
I'm allowed to dream that we will have no rebates.
Yes, no,
but
but it was...
definitely we are in the hands of the member states, and what the Commission proposes is gradual phasing out.
Yeah,
and the idea is gradual phasing out of the rebates, because definitely when one rebate was born, then the other rebate was, because some of the rebates were rebates on rebates. Because I will not go into details. So and here what we also see, and it's a complex that needs to be taken into account with the gradual introduction of the other resources that we as Commission would like to bring as close as possible to be genuine resources. No EU taxes, please, but genuine own resources as we have the customs duties. Maybe the situation in world trade will deteriorate to the fact that suddenly we will have so much in customs duties income that we probably will be having good income for the EU budget. But this is not what the Commission would wish. I have to
send a thank you note to Trump.
This is not what the Commission would wish, I would have to stress. But because the customs duties, it's quite logical. You have a common market. Whatever comes to the common market as is subject to customs duties goes to the EU budget, and the member states get something. So I think it's the VAT, and when I was in the Institute of International Relations at the beginning of the 1990s and studying the EU, the VAT was still the favorite own resource, but the precondition was harmonization of VAT among the member states, which never happened, and now the VAT own resource is perhaps as complicated as the British rebate, because you are getting the VAT collected to a common denominator, and it's very, very, very complex as well. So what we see with the rebates is to making things simple. The simplification we have proposed in 2011 in the previous MFF, lump sums. We have calculated the lump sums and we proposed it to the member state, but that was not acceptable. So we continue this, and I think it is also a very important part that the European Parliament is pushing through, and definitely the European Parliament has a role to play in the whole setup as defined by the Lisbon Treaty in the MFF.
Would anyone else want to come into this point, or are we good? I mean, I would add that on the customs, if there was a member of the Dutch government here, they would say it's a quadruple whammy, because there are only a couple of countries which benefit more from taking a share of the customs duties, and the fact that's going to be cut is another thing that the Belgians or the Dutch would say that they're losing out on again.
Yeah,
so
that's the Rotterdam and Antwerpen effect. Definitely, I could see no problem in 10% in the Czech Republic or Slovakia, because there probably is very little that we are getting on the customs duties because we have no sea access. On the other hand, I think that's something that is quite a natural part of it, and we are returning back to the 10% that we had sometimes in the past. So there's practically nothing new. The fact that in 2013 it was 25 and in the current is 20 was just a result of the negotiations. So that's the Commission proposal, and Nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, but we hope that it will be agreed quickly because we have the European elections coming, and if we don't do it, then the beneficiaries of EU budget would suffer. They could be, for instance, research programs that will have to be interrupted because the financing of that research team will have to be stopped because the period finishes on the 31st of December 2020, and if we are delayed with the MFF and with the new programs, there may be a gap, as it was at the beginning of this current Multiannual Financial Framework.
Okay. I think we should try and first go for questions in the audience. Does anyone want to jump in with a question for the panelists? Not yet?
You can use the ones on the screen.
No? Okay, so we'll start with Slido and give you some more chance. We'll go with the top question because you can like which question you want, and by crowdsourcing, we have Anonymous who wants to ask whether the ruling parties in the Czech Republic and Slovakia who have problems with corruption linked to EU funds, will it hamper their negotiating power around the table when it comes to thrashing out the MFF? Who wants to go for that one?
Well, obviously,
Less popular.
Slovakia is there, and of course, it is. Well, there is a difference between real corruption and perceived corruption. This is what is. I don't know how it is in Czech Republic, but obviously the perception of corruption is much higher than the true corruption, and I'm sure that the government takes all the measures possible, you know, to make sure that any space gets smaller and smaller. But I think that any steps or measures or proposals that go within the direction of limiting possible corruption are more than welcome.
Jorge, maybe I can ask you about if people are unfamiliar with the way the MFF negotiations work, but in a very crude sense, you could say the previous battles have always been between net payers and the net receivers. Do you think it's a bit more blurred this time? We have other types of alliances on other EU issues. Will the Visegrad act as a bloc? Will Austria fight for them? You know, what is the kind of cleavages that are coming up in this round of MFF negotiations?
I mean, they are pretty similar, surprisingly, the groups, but you have the 1%. What is different now is that what I see also from the net contributors is a little bit a different way. They are more fighting for the gross absolute ceiling and have tempered a bit their net issues. So before, because of the UK rebate, everything was their net. Now you can see beneficial, but there is a slight weakening of the how much I get, how much I give. Is more, it's how much does it actually cost overall. Especially from the net contributors, there is a slight change in attitude in this sense. I think that some countries will be a bit difficult. The Netherlands, yes, but the Netherlands, the government needs also to show that it takes part in all of this. I think they got a bit surprised by this. They felt a bit that for the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, the most important thing is that if there is a budget that is big, the Netherlands has to be seen as being very important in deciding how it works and how it functions. Because I don't think the Netherlands in itself, or even the people, although there are some Eurosceptics and everything, but I think that the main thing that he has to prove is that he is part of the actual final decision as the Netherlands, because Rutte is not anti-European. Let's put it like this. Countries that will be more complicated, I think, is the Austria, because Austria doesn't care so much as long as they can be a bit annoying. This is my feeling that I have. They are very much into a very rigid position. I think the Dutch are much more, in fact, they're more accommodating, but people need to, in the Netherlands, to feel that they have something to say in Europe and not just pay. That's a bit of the perception. So you need to play. You need to play with every country a bit differently. So there are differences, yes, because the UK is leaving. So the main anchor around this rebate is not there. So people have to reinvent their position a bit. And some countries also will not be able to hide behind the UK rebate, which is also what I had this feeling in the past a bit, that some countries were saying, oh yeah, we are great, we will have a rebate on the rebate, but then they hide a bit behind the fact that there is a rebate to say that's why we are acting like this. This time all the countries have to put their cards on the table, and it's a little bit different. But the group is the same, huh? The groups are very identifiable. And yes, and you have this Visegrad group that is becoming a bit clearer, but I wonder what it means in the end budgetarily. I don't have a very clear idea on that. There is a common position because you are losing in cohesion, but I wonder how far it is really a player. Maybe, I don't know. I'm still looking at it. Huh?
I guess one of the countries whose political dynamics have changed the most in the last few months is Italy. And Matteo Salvini had made a point in his election campaign, and Berlusconi to some extent, about getting back our money from Brussels, and if they don't help us out on other things like the Stability and Growth Pact or on migration, then the budget could become a fight. Does anyone sense the politics of Italy becoming one of the unknowns in the member state negotiations? Who wants to come in?
Well, the Commission made a proposal, and now the negotiations started in the Council. Is a group formed in the Council. Quite an interesting anecdote. It used to be called Friends of the Presidency. Now it's called MFF group. I hope they will still stay friends of the presidency, even though there is this small change of this negotiating group. The Commission is now presenting all the proposals in detail in this group. We made all the proposals for the sectorial legislation, so the whole machinery of negotiation is going to start very, very soon. So the positions of individual member states will probably for the first time, they were already voiced during the General Affairs Council. There is General Affairs Council next week, and there is definitely the European Council where MFF is going to be discussed. So I think we couldn't wait a week for seeing what the positions of the leaders are going to be. But returning back a little bit to this question, because you're still taking us to the net balances, and we can just ask ourselves a question. For instance, when it comes to the Netherlands now have big part of what they get from their budget from Horizon 2020.
Yeah.
So, in 2016, in the year when there was a Brexit vote, would anybody guess how much the British got from Horizon 2020 and Framework Programme 6 in the allocations? 1.3 billion annually in 1 year. So imagine there is, and we are now proposing more as a Commission on research, innovation, digital Europe. So supposing the British part, the British lot, is dividing, and this 1 billion, or whatever it will be in the future, is taken by the countries that are well prepared for competition in that area, then I can imagine most of it, because it's now nearly 40% of the Dutch allocation, it can go and it can increase the Dutch allocation in the absolute terms. It's nothing wrong. It's just that the Dutch universities, Dutch research organizations are stronger in getting for European money. Reversing that argument and looking down here to the Czech parliament or a little bit further in the Danube to the Slovak government, I think cohesion money, agricultural envelope is one part of the budget. Cool. But there is a growing part of the EU budget that is open to all member states. And look how weak our countries, and I will speak as a Czech, our countries are in getting this part of the EU budget, which is high quality digital resources. We have calculated on the basis of our figures in 2016. So Estonia has a certain allocation, I think it's close to 10% of this part of the budget. If we extrapolated this percentage of Estonia to the Czech Republic, we could have had 2 billion Czech korunas more on education and research. So I don't know how the countries, when they are calculating their net positions, how they calculate theirs. I can assure you that in the British statistics, this part is not taken into account. That is why there are differences in the calculation between the Commission and between the British statistics, because the money that goes directly to the British beneficiaries is not visible to the statistics in the UK. And I think that in the calculating on net positions for the future, how much would you take in those parts of the budget that are open to everybody?
I mean, I guess one of the biggest elements of this legacy element is the common agricultural policy. And we had a question which flashed up, it's disappeared, but it was asking whether the holy cow of the CAP is going to be slaughtered under this new budget. And Macron did mention it famously in his Sorbonne speech, but the French government has since reacted quite negatively to the Commission proposal as too bold. So the question from, I think, Martin Michelot is, what will it take to reach a compromise on the CAP? Who wants to jump in? Petr, can I go with you?
Well, I will try. I was trying to illustrate that the common agricultural policy in the early periods of common financing amounted to more than 70% of the total budget or pre-budget, but of course in the period when the agriculture contributed to European GDP with something like 15%. Now it's 1.5, and still within the current period CAP has something more than 30% of the budget. So it's about two things, in my opinion, in the adjustment of the amount to the real economic power of the sector, and then about the restructuring of the instruments, because the important part of the common agricultural policy is allocated for the purpose of direct payments. I think that one of the possible solutions is to increase the project-based concept of the allocation, and of course respecting some other consequent areas, not only the agricultural sector as a whole, but for example the development of rural areas. From the Czech point of view, there is one very specific issue which is common with Slovakia as well, and that's the size of the average size of farms, because we have inherited from the communist past totally, I would say, different model of agricultural sector. It's connected with the known issue of capping. The average size of the Czech and Slovak farms is something like 150 hectares, and the average of the European Union is visibly lower. Currently, it's also very intensively debated that within the CAP much more focus on small and medium-sized farmers could be preferred, and perhaps one quotation from the report or from the proposal. Currently, 80% of the common agricultural policy expenditures are allocated to roughly 20% of recipients. So perhaps some more even or evenly based model of distribution could help as well.
Martina, can I get your response?
Yeah, I agree. I would add that we were certainly surprised by a decrease in rural development, actually, because we think that rural development is more, I would say, par when you have investment, okay, and that it's more like creating competition. So maybe it would be good to hear Commission What is behind
the
it?
Commission decreased in rural development, but increased the flexibility between the pillars. So that is why the member states are offered to consider where the priorities are in each member state. So that's basically the gist of the proposal. And to the question, I mean, in the 80s or beginning of the 80s, the share of common agricultural policy was going about 70%. I mean, in our proposal, the share of common agricultural policy is just below 30% in the whole pie chart. So there is a certain tendency that goes. And as I said previously, there is a whole new reformed common agricultural policy proposal where we focus on the modernization, on performance. And definitely there are some details concerning the distribution of the money, focus on small farms, but there is also the amount of workers that are working on a given farm is going to be taken into account. So you have to see the whole proposal in all its brightness as it was proposed by the Commission.
Yes. I mean, I have to say, I would just eliminate the percentages of the past budgets, because in the past budgets, transport was so much and another one. It's the overall amount, you know. Regional policy was not there at the beginning in the 80s, and then the money came. The proportionally changes, it doesn't mean that the money changes. But the point is that it's the member states that usually have had problems using rural development funding and have been asking, most of them, to be shifting to direct payments, because direct payments is something you do not really co-finance. So you don't have the problem of preparing a project, of getting and so on. So it's much better to disburse, because a lot of countries had problem getting the projects to do rural development programs. So this is a reality. Now, my problem with agriculture, something completely different, is that the formula in which the money is attributed is based on something that was really the basic amounts that are allocated today to farms come from some issues that happened in 1989 in the World Trade, the GATT. The link between actual costs of farming and actual practices to these payments is still quite dissociated. That's why you have farmers getting very different amounts of money in different parts of Europe, and the main reason is because bad luck, you were in the wrong moment to get the money. This is very difficult to change, because the moment you try to, and the Commission is trying, to be honest, the moment you try to flatten it out, then it's where France is going to have a heart attack. But unfortunately, a fair cap, something that really works, that is not distortive, is something that the net contributors would hate to see, because they would be the ones that lose most from this exercise. I mean, this is the problem that France had. France was very happy when there were 15 countries and it was getting 25% of the budget of agriculture. And they were happy, and the reason it was like this is because when the cap was created, and there were 6 countries, they created a cap for products that were produced for France. You know, although there were some vegetables and oranges in the south of Italy, the cap was done for cereals, milk, and all of this. And when you had sheep, like the UK, you were not getting enough money. And that's the reason. The world is changing, and I think the problem with the cap is that every time we are speaking about the cap as an amount of money. And I think in the future, it has to be really, the funding has to be allocated to actual problems. But the moment you do that, the distribution gets ballistic in another direction. So one of the first steps that I have been proposing, and nobody listens, but it doesn't matter, would be to say agriculture, the budget is small, pay through the budget what is to countries like in the cohesion. You have this amount of GDP per capita, you are poorer, you get support, you get less, and you have escalation. And what is funny about that is that, first of all, the budget would be 10 billion, not 30. But the other point is that I discovered that this is exactly the amount of money that really moves between one country to another. France has a net balance as percentage of GDP in agriculture of practically 0. This means the money that they pay, they get back. And it's close to 0. So if they only pay the amount of money to send, for example, here or somewhere else, where there is a difference, it's practically for them will be very small. And then you see the problem in the agriculture. But this is something that is terribly difficult, because the way the subsidy was created was so distorted that today we cannot get out of it. That's all. That's very simple. But yes, it should be reformed. But I think the solution is that there will be an agreement, but there will be maybe more national envelopes, more something like that.
Petr just had to run off, but we still have
Yes.
15 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Any questions from the audience? No? Still a bit shy.
Some bombardment.
Maybe you will type them in.
Is there something new in there?
There's a few here, and I think one of the ones that maybe we could think about closing on is the politics of, I guess, the European Union and the fact that we have an election coming up. So one of the main things that you hear is that we should try and get the MFF sewn up before the European parliamentary election so it doesn't become a political football, and the composition of the parliament will change. So one of the questions we have is what in the MFF debate will change if Eurosceptic forces strengthen significantly in the European Parliament next year. And I guess this is a question which does hint at the fact that there will be some upheaval in whatever the Parliament looks like. And we might know, one of the few things we might know is that potentially the EPP will be the largest party, but apart from that, there seems to be a lot of uncertainty. Martina, in terms of the time frame, do you think that it has to be done in the next 12 months? And is that even realistic?
Well, this is the ambition, and I fully understand what is the argument behind why it should go quickly. But given the fact that really the issue is complicated and politically sensitive, I'm not sure whether this timing target will be hit. And of course, we could hear in the introductory speech that there is a direction in the current proposal to move to a more central level of many instruments. So I can imagine that this fact might disturb then Eurosceptics in Parliament, clearly. I don't know, budget for the Eurozone being one of them, for example.
Petr, does the Commission have any preference, or is it as soon as possible?
I don't think it's only the Commission preference. It should be the preference for any beneficiary from EU funding. As I said, if we have a delay, then it's not the Commission, basically, because there is only a very small part that goes to the European public administration of the budget. The majority, 94% of the budget, goes to the cities, municipalities, students, NGOs, researchers, etc. So this is really a realistic estimation of the Commission if you take into account the whole formation process of the new Parliament, of the new Commission. So it's a coincidence that this time it falls just the proposal 1 year before the European elections, and there is a big recommendation, and the Commission will do all it's possible, mobilize its forces, and I think that we see at least a very positive reaction from the Austrian presidency, so there is an intention to finish the presentation of the main proposal by the end of July. Then there is a usual break in the work of the institutions in August, but there is a lot of meetings that are prepared as of the beginning of September, when already the negotiations should start, and let's say the negotiating box is already to be presented at the beginning of September. And if I take it and look in the past, that we proposed our proposal on the 29th of June 2011, 2012, 2013, February, we had the agreement in the Council, and then still the Parliament sometime in the autumn, so the whole negotiation took about 2.5 years, and we were then delayed, and the programs started late. So I think it would be a good signal for Europe, and I think it would be also a good signal for pro-European forces for the European elections. If we have an agreement, if there is this kind of, I would say, support of European unity that can be also transposed to the campaign.
Jorge, does it pose a problem for democratic accountability if the new parliament has to be bound by an agreement that its previous legislators make? And do you even think that it will have a catalyzing effect? Because a lot of people that I speak to are very skeptical that the 12 months will see that much getting done.
I mean, from the point of timing, it's very, very ambitious, and it's hard to get into the World Book of Records. That's certainly because it's not past experience. it will be good. Now, from democratic accountability, you have the parliament. The parliament is theirs. The parliament you have now, and you have governments that are now, and they vote. And you're saying, oh no, but this was voted, but now we have a new parliament, and therefore the previous parliament is not the democratic accountability. It's not about democratic accountability. Either you have an agreement with the parliament you have. And to say that this parliament doesn't have the right, has to be the next one, well, you can argue. It's all very philosophical. It's philosophical, but I don't think that this is the main. I mean, for me, they will use it. They will say it, they will complain, and I don't know what is then the political implications and all of this. I really don't know what would that mean. But still, the parliament is the parliament, and that's it. I suppose that what is probably going to happen is that there may be agreements on very big issues that somehow are cast on a bit more beton than others. And some things will be left to the next parliament, because I find it's very, very ambitious to actually finish everything. So, but maybe you can already put it in a position where it's much strengthened, and you hope that everything will not go in trouble. The other thing is that imagine the next parliament actually not agreeing on the work that has been done now. If the parliament does this, that I'm sorry, but maybe Eurosceptics will be happy because they don't care. But generally speaking, it's going to be very negative for the European Parliament to be the ones that block the budget. So even then, even if it's not really agreed now, will the next Parliament really actually do the atomic bomb? They never did. They always menace, but they never do, because I don't think that anybody is going to excuse the Parliament. None of the people that don't get the money, none of the regions that see the regional policy completely blocked are going to go and celebrate to the European parliamentarians the great achievement of power. So even that, I think that you have to, I think the next Parliament will have to digest a lot, even if they want it or not.
Sadly, we don't have an MEP. Are there any MEPs in the audience who are willing to expose themselves? No?
No, okay. That they're willing to expose themselves? No, probably half the room, but they don't want to expose themselves.
I think the topic we'll finish on is one that we have not concentrated on so far, and it's been brought up, is migration and security, which is one of the areas where the European added value seems to be strongest, and is particularly responding to challenges of the last couple of years. Martina, can I ask your government's reaction to what the Commission has proposed on boosting border defence and the overall direction, which is spending more on these types of areas? And the question in particular says that the Central Eastern European governments obsessed with migration and security but are reluctant to enlarge the EU budget and want to keep their cohesion funds. Is that contradictory?
On behalf of Slovakia, I have to say that, first of all, we are not reluctant to enlarge the EU budget, because actually we did agree, and it was stated several times, that we are ready to finance a larger budget, which is very important, and want to keep the cohesion funds. Well, in our case, this is not true. The cohesion will go down by 22% in Slovakia. We're going to basically be hit 3 times. We are performing economically well, so we are entitled to pay more. Cohesion envelope is going down, and we should not forget that the co-financing rate within the cohesion, in the proposal, there is an increase in the co-financing. So it will really mean quite a significant effect on public finance in our country. Of course, the argument goes in the way that economically we are performing well, so we truly understand that the envelope of the cohesion is going down. So I would argue here that we are ready to pay a larger budget, and we understand the arguments behind it.
Petr, do you want to come in?
I think the Commission proposed more on border protection. That's what also we heard from many member states, including the countries in Central and Eastern Europe. And many countries said that there is readiness to increase the contribution to the EU budget. And basically, I'm not aware of any negative, I would say, reactions that concern the Commission proposals on border protection, how we want to deal with the root causes of migration, which all received more money than previously, because that was the lessons learned from the straitjacket we had in the previous or in the current multi-annual financial framework. We wanted to react to the new challenges, and that's precisely there. And even the cohesion funding can be used under circumstances to tackle the effects of migration. So I think I don't see there is a big dichotomy in these two. When it comes to volumes, that has been said certainly, but that's also a question that has been already outlined. It's economic success that also drives the final calculation.
Jorge, one final question, and it's a little bit off-piece but very relevant to the conversations that are going to be happening at the summit next week. But we know that the Austrian presidency is making migration one of its big political priorities. And the last couple of days we've heard about novel ideas. I think the Council summit conclusion mentioned things like a disembarkation centre, which is probably EU sort of jargon for having centres, processing centres to keep economic migrants outside of the EU. It's very clearly one of the hottest political topics. Is it, in terms of the MFF discussion, paying for things like border protection, maybe even paying for things like this disembarkation centre, is it something that should become a bigger part of the MFF, basically trying to keep people out? Is that something that you want, really, when it comes to long-term spending plans and we think about a modern, innovative budget?
That's a good question. Let's say the point about the EU budget is that it is a common European budget, and it should reflect also the common decision. And I may be an academic and may wish the best of world and write myself the budget. I would be then killed and destroyed and burned on a stake. So it's not going to work. We have the member states are deciding or getting together and saying, we as a common EU, we would like to do something different, and they will try to experiment with the detention centers, and they will ask for the EU to contribute this. My personal philosophical opinion of this is rather negative, but it's nothing to do with money. But okay, if they do that, and it's a common system, and we have migration and borders a common policy, and the member states take a decision to do that, then it's going to happen. And it will be in sacrifice of another part of the budget. But if they are ready to do that, and if they want to finance more for that, I mean, that's called, you want democratic legitimacy. There you got it. I mean, what can I say? That's it.
There are a couple of questions which are a bit more general, and we won't have time for them, I'm afraid. But what I forgot to mention at the beginning is that Petr's paper is part of the welcome pack. So we saw a couple of slides, but a lot of these questions about the sort of what will change about the new EU budget and the things that will be different, I think will be answered in that. So if you're more curious about the generalities, then you'll be able to find them in your welcome pack. We are officially out of time, so I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us. I'd like to thank all four of my panelists, to give them a round of applause.